Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male, and today I'm going to be talking about this reaction video that Icky and Finster did to one of my videos where I was talking about autogynephilia. And they attempt in this video to debunk the concept of autogynephilia, and they just don't do a very good job. So I'm going to react to this and sort of debunk their debunking of me talking about the AGP to trans pipeline, how egg culture and the trans feminine community is encouraging the trans identification pipeline amongst organophiles who otherwise have pretty mild dysphoria. So, right off the bat, we can see that they are misrepresenting the theory of autogynephilia because in the thumbnail, you might be mistaken that they're quoting me saying that I said they're all just perverts, but I actually didn't say that. So, that is actually a misquotation, falsely implying that I said that the theory of autogynephilia implies that they're all just a bunch of perverts. In my opinion, this is the biggest straw man of the theory of autogynephilia. It's often construed to be saying that, oh, it's just a fetish, or they're all just a bunch of perverts or whatever. But that's not actually what the theory says. The theory is properly considered an etiological theory. It is a theory about the origins of something, and all it notices is that there is a behavioral pattern distinction between two different clusters of trans people. In the first cluster, let's call it cluster A, you have trans women who have been are exclusively attracted to men, have always been exclusively attracted to men, and if they didn't transition, they probably would have grown up to be naturally effeminate gay men. In cluster A, these trans women, they come out at a very young age. They show patterns of gender nonconforming from a very young age, like 2, 3 years old. They've quote unquote known they've trans for like a much longer time, from like since like childhood. And they're much more effeminate. They usually, pass better. And that is cluster A. Now, in cluster B, you have the trans women who typically are gynophilic. They're attracted to women, or they're bisexual, or they're asexual, but they still can be asexual, but also in terms of like what they're attracted to, they're attracted to women even if they're asexual. So like a lot of people say that, oh, well, I'm asexual, so therefore I can't possibly be AGP. But in Blanchard's original study, he did study people who classify themselves as asexual but are still gynophilic. So in this second cluster, cluster B, you typically come out later. You have attraction to women, and you don't show early signs of effeminacy in childhood. You are not a naturally effeminate boy. You sort of have typical masculine interest, and also uh, the key thing is that if you ask this question about whether you've ever experienced arousal due to cross gender fantasy, then the cluster B, the autogynephilic type, they do show arousal. So that's all it's showing, is that there is a pattern, a distinction, a distinct behavioral profile between cluster A and cluster B, and the defining factor is relative to your sexual orientation. So whether you are exclusively attracted to men, or whether you're bisexual or gynophilic. So because these two types of trans people, they just sort of manifest in different ways. And I should mention that any sort of proposed counter example to that typology between these two types is typically explained by the phenomenon of pseudo bisexuality. So you can actually be of the autogynephilic type and be attracted to men and date men exclusively. That's called pseudo bisexuality or meta attraction, where your attraction to men is more so based not on pure androphilia, the pure attraction to the raw masculine body, but insofar as the men are validating your own femininity. But going back to this thumbnail saying they're all just perverts, that's not what the theory says. It says that for the cluster B, for the trans women who are gynophilic, who are not exclusively attracted to men, in that cluster of trans women, they typically have a history of cross-gender arousal. But that does not mean that, after they transition, that they're all just, perverted fetishes who have, boners 24/7. Theory of autogynephilia is about the origins of gender dysphoria. And it happens to be the case that in cluster B, in the trans women who are gynophilic, attracted to women who call themselves transbians or they're bisexual, before they transition, they often struggle with this question of, is it just a fetish? So that is an indication that kink and fetish and this question of sexuality and this idea that they experience euphoria boners during their initial cross gender fantasy. um, you only see that in the cluster B type. You only see that in the trans women who are gynophilic. You don't see the trans women who are exclusively attracted to men and have been exclusively attracted to men and who are naturally effeminate from a very young age. You don't see them struggling with this question of, is it just a fetish? And in Icky's own videos, she talks a lot about, she has a video on how tons of her followers are constantly asking her the question, am I trans or is it just a fetish? That is a clue that the for the gynophilic trans women, the trans women who are attracted to women or attracted to feminized males, that is a sign that their gender dysphoria has roots in this erotic ideology. And that's all it says. So it doesn't say that, once you transition, you're going to, that it remains a fetish, because that's the idea. It's not just a fetish. It says that it starts off through this gender exploration in the kink and in the fetish. So that's just a misrepresentation. Okay, so let's watch the video.
We need to ease into this.
Heard that one before.
Yeah. I'm really excited for this video. Somebody made a video about me. The title is Trans Influencers and the AGP to Trans Pipeline. This is going to be really, really fun. I've never had anyone make a weird 4chan video about me.
I watched a little bit of this and actually didn't.
Is it bad?
It's like
Mr. Metaphysical or whatever the f you were saying earlier.
you're letting him like strawman you there. He changed your point.
There's no good fate. Just every time I say something, he's like, she just admitted it. What? I know that this is probably going to suck a little bit. They're going to say mean things and you may get upset, but please don't harass them because that is lame and we don't want that. Are you ready?
Yes.
Let's go.
That's the wrong one, babe.
I accidentally clicked the wrong thing.
Guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male. I'm going to be talking about egg culture in online trans communities, particularly among trans-identified males.
10 seconds in. Not bad.
I didn't know this was...
so there's nothing wrong with the term trans-identified male. It's literally just a neutral description. You are male and you have a trans identity. Therefore, you are a trans-identified male. Don't take it so personally. Jeez.
This was like an incel video.
And how this egg culture is driving trans-identified males who have autogynephilia. So this is so stupid. This like fake performative, I don't know what I'm talking about. When Icky literally already did a video about autogynephilia. So pretending to look up autogynephilia as if you don't know what that is, that's so disingenuous. It's just like, it's so stupid. You already did a video talking about it. So clearly you're familiar with the concept, because in previous videos, you've tried to debunk the concept when you're talking about, I think in your video, is it just a fetish or whatever?
Gynophobia is a term coined by Blanchard for a male's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought of himself as a female.
Oh, so it's like all trans people are just like a fetish thing. Is that the point?
No, that's not what the thing says. It's about an ideology, a typological difference. And it's not about all trans women. It's only about the trans women who are not exclusively attracted to men. Because you have these two clusters, the cluster A and the cluster B. In the trans women who are exclusively attracted to men and have always been exclusively attracted to men and show natural effeminacy from a young age, they don't show this pattern of asking questions like, is it just a fetish? Whereas in the other type, the cluster B, they do have this history of asking the question, is it just a fetish? and getting so-called euphoria boners through cross-gender exploration and fantasy prior to their transition. So that's all it says. It doesn't say that all trans women have like a fetish or that they're pervert. It's literally just about an ideology, about the origins of something. But for these people, they can't understand that the theory is not saying that they're all just perverts or that all trans people are just walking around with like a boner all day long, walking around in a constant state of arousal. It's about the origins of the gender dysphoria and noticing a distinctive pattern, and that the trans women who are not exclusively attracted to men typically show this pattern of cross-gender arousal prior to the development of their gender dysphoria and prior to their decision to transition. That's all it says. And so the fact that these trans women and every other trans woman continues to strawman the theory, saying that, oh, you're just saying we're all just a bunch of perverts, we're all just, a bunch of deviants, which actually is kind of like ironic to me, because both F1NN5TER and Icky like do OnlyFans and like do like pornography and stuff. And they're, if you look at F1NNSTER's like Twitter timeline, it's just like constantly posting very erotic sort of fetish stuff. So like, I mean, it's just like, to me, it's a level of like defensiveness about like thinking that like, but yeah, anyway, the like theory doesn't say that, once you transition, that it continues to be just a fetish. Because if you look at Anne Lawrence, who talks about in her paper, Becoming What You Love, the autogynephilia actually has both an erotic component and a romantic attachment component. So once you transition, the erotic component can fade away, and this love of oneself, becoming what you love, becoming your own girlfriend, becoming your own partner. That's just a metaphor. Don't take it too seriously, but it's this idea of becoming what you love, this internalized attraction. Because what autogynephilia is, it's internalized heterosexuality. You have attraction to femininity, attraction to womanhood, but you also want to embody aspects of womanhood. You want to feminize yourself. You want to fall in love with yourself. This internalized attraction is a motivating factor, and it's not the only motivating factor, but it is a motivating factor. And also, you don't see this in the trans women who are exclusively attracted to men and are naturally effeminate from a very young age. Okay.
I'm going to cut in instantly.
We've made it 18
We've
seconds.
made it 18 seconds in. Cis women get turned on by thinking about themselves in sexual situations.
So this is the fundamental confusion. So it is not the case that cis women show the same type of arousal patterns that are typical of autogynephilic males. So if you give there's something that Ray Blanchard developed called the core autogynephilia scale, which is a scale to measure one's attraction to, for example, putting on pantyhose, or like dressing up sexy, or like imagining that you're female. And they gave that core autogynephilia scale to trans women, to natal males, and to natal females. And natal females did not show the same patterns of arousal that are typical of autogynephilia. Why? Because a natal female, a woman, is not turned on by the mere fact of being female. Now, and trying to say that like a natal female gets turned on in sexual situations, that's not the same thing as autogynephilia. Because autogynephilia is a male being turned on by the mere idea of embodying femininity, or embodying being female. But a woman is not turned on by the idea of merely being female. A female that doesn't just merely have the thought like I'm female and get turned on. Whereas that's what's happening in the case of the autogynephilia. The male is fantasizing about transforming into a woman, and that mere thought turns him on. And also, natal females are not getting turned on by putting on makeup, shaving their legs, doing all these mundane things. Whereas that's common with the autogynephile. So all these mundane things are not are not typical of female sexuality, and trying to equate female sexuality with the sexuality of of autogynephilia, that is just completely baseless. And furthermore, in the studies that have purported to show that natal females do show signs of autogynephilia, in that questionnaire that they gave to them, it wasn't the same questionnaire that they gave to in the original autogynephilic scale. And also, the arousal that the women experience was more in relationship to getting ready for a date, like imagining themselves getting ready for a date, and it's just not the same. So this idea that natal females are also just as autogynephilic as trans women, is just it's just not borne out by the facts.
Trans women get turned on by thinking about themselves in sexual situations.
Yeah,
they don't just get turned on about thinking themselves in sexual situations. They get turned on by the thought of embodying femininity. They get turned on by the idea of like having breasts. They get turned on by the idea of like having a vagina. A natal female does not get turned on merely by the thought of having a vagina. They just don't. They get turned on by the idea of having sex with like whoever they're attracted to, but they don't get turned on merely by the idea of like thinking of themselves as like female. Why? Because they're already female. Whereas for the male, they're not female. And that's why it's arousing, is because it's the imagination of the fantasy of becoming something that you're not. Whereas for the female, they're not turned on by the idea of imagining the reality of their own body. Whereas for the autogynephile, they're turned on by the fantasy of imagining that they have a totally different body. That's the difference. They're not the same.
What's the difference? The difference is just saying, like, that's not a woman, they're a man. So them being turned on as a woman is wrong. But they are a woman, so they're just turned on.
Indoctrinating them into this false idea that their gender confusion is at the root of all their issues, and that somehow transitioning is going to solve all their problems.
I don't think that transitioning solved any of my problems besides the trans ones.
Yeah, pretty much.
I still had to take ADHD medication years later.
So maybe Icky is not saying this, but I just did a video recently where a trans activist was pushing this idea that HRT is this magic solution to fix all your mental health problems. So like maybe Icky isn't pushing this idea that, HRT and like hormones and transition is this like pathway to, cure all of your mental health problems. And good for her if that's what she's saying, because a lot of young trans people, they have all these problems in their life, and they think that this gender exploration stuff is going to somehow magically make their life like a million times better or solve all their mental health problems, when in a lot of cases it just kind of pushes those problems down the road.
Still
have to go to therapy, still
had therapy about non-trans related issues.
Antidepressants.
Yeah, I'm definitely happier, but that's because like I'm more comfortable as a person.
Yeah, you could have done all the fixing and this would have still remained.
Yeah.
If you don't know, autogynephilia is love of oneself as a woman. It is inverted heterosexuality. It is a sexuality, a sexual orientation that causes you to be attracted to femininity as a heterosexual male, but also it causes you to be attracted to yourself becoming feminized.
Trans women get turned on seeing themselves in a feminine setting, being a woman, and femininity. So does that mean all trans women are lesbians? What about the straight trans women?
So this is so stupid. So Blanchardian typology distinguishes between the homosexual transsexuals, those transsexuals who are exclusively attracted to men, who what they would call straight trans women, and then everyone else. In this video, I'm only talking about the autogynephiles. But the Blanchardian typology does not say that all trans women are autogynephiles. So this is just like basic ignorance about what the theory says. The theory says that there's two types of trans women.
What about trans women that only like men? Or I mean,
yeah, those are called the homosexual transsexuals. Like if you just do like a little bit of research, you would understand that Blanchard distinguished between the homosexual transsexuals and the autogynephilic transsexuals.
Obviously the argument makes no sense either way. Even if you are like a hardcore lesbian trans woman, it does not make sense.
So it's attraction to, but notice how Icky didn't say why it doesn't make sense. Why it doesn't make sense that this theory of inverted heterosexuality, because you can see this in the film Envy Desire. These autogynephiles have a envy of femininity and a desire, or they're desirous of femininity, but they're also envious of femininity. And also it applies to trans women. They're envious, or they're desirous of trans women, but they're also envious of trans women as well. Into femininity and envy of femininity, such that you want to also be feminine yourself. That is driving the majority of trans identification in trans women today.
The majority?
The majority.
Yes, this data comes from the U.S. National Trans Survey or whatever back in like 2015, because the theory of autogynephilia, the Blanchardine typology, it's relative to your sexual orientation. And it basically says that there's two types, and the two types are relative to your sexual orientation. So there's the homosexuals, the trans women who are exclusively attracted to men, and everyone else. That's the theoretical foundation for the theory. So if you knew what the sexual orientation of trans people is, you could accurately estimate the prevalence of the of the two different types, the homosexual type and the autogynephilic type. And if you look in Phil Illy's book, Auto-Heterosexual, he looks at that data where they talk about the sexual orientation of like trans women, and notes that roughly 80% of trans women are of the non-homosexual sexual orientation. Therefore, we can extrapolate from that fact to the idea that the majority of trans women are of the autogynephilic ideology, because the ideology is based on the sexual orientation. So if you know what is the sexual orientation of the population of trans women, and the majority of trans women are, call themselves trans lesbians, or they're bisexual, or they're gynephilic to some degree or another. In other words, they're non-homosexual. They're non-exclusively attracted to men, and they haven't been exclusively attracted to men from like a very young age. We can therefore extrapolate that the majority of trans women are of the autogynephilic type.
Holy shit.
That is what's driving envy.
So I'm going to share a video. So trying to reduce it down to just envy. No, it's actually, it's inverted heterosexuality. It's internalized attraction. And also it operates as a predisposing factor. It's not the case that it's the only causal factor, or that there's not other causal factors. It's just that it's a predisposing factor, this internalized attraction. And you only see this predisposing factor in the trans women who are of the gynephilic type. A video from this really popular.
Call me popular.
So Icky is the girlfriend of also another huge trans content creator, F1NN5TER. So
F1NN5TER mentioned.
And then, he also, got indoctrinated and groomed into the trans pipeline. So now F1NN5TER.
Did you groom me?
Why me?
So I don't use that word lightly. I do not use that word lightly, but there are some pretty serious allegations in regards to what is going on with this particular couple. So there has been several news stories. And also, if you look on the farms, you'll find receipts for all this, that there's a wealthy donor, a wealthy guy called 10 Muses, who has a kink for trans women, a kink for forced feminization. And this wealthy donor, 10 Muses, offered F1NN5TER hundreds of thousands of dollars to feminize him and to force feminize F1NN5TER. And so these wealthy donors, you know, sort of, yeah. So I don't use the word grooming lightly, but I can't think of any other word to describe what's going on, because these wealthy donors are paying for the feminizing process as part of a feminizing kink, as part of a forced feminizing kink. And again, these are just allegations. I'm just saying this is an allegation that there are wealthy donors, wealthy men who have kinks for trans women, kinks for forced feminization. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that is, you know, that's not so cute and nice. That's actually pretty dark. You know, there's some dark stuff that, you know, these trans women, and both of them are in OnlyFans. Both of them are doing, you know, pornographic content, and they're doing this pornographic content for wealthy men who are giving them a lot of money. And so this is not a word I use lightly. And throughout Finster's you know, career, you can see that he talks about how this egg culture, you know, these trans women constantly telling them that he's an egg, he's an egg, he's an egg, that has to do some sort of work on you psychologically over the long haul, such that, you know, it sort of indoctrinates you into the trans pipeline, such that, you know, you have to take on this trans identity rather than just remaining like a femboy. Like, and it, to me, it seems like Finster is not actually like wanting to be a full-blown like trans woman. He just but I think he's taking on this trans identity, in my personal opinion, out of some sort of social pressure, because he just hung out with so many trans women that he felt like he had to take on the like trans label, rather than just, you know, calling himself like a gender non-conforming male and like a femboy. And he recently did a video or a live stream where he talked about how, you know, like, you can't stay a femboy forever. You eventually grow out of the femboy stage. So, and I think, I don't know. So I don't think Finster is as trans identified as, you know, he might claim he is, but I think he might be getting pressure from Icky, from these trans people, from all his audience, you know, trying to put this pressure to be part of the trans community, because there's tremendous pressure to join the trans community, to be part of the trans community, to join egg culture, to have all the trans flags, to take on the trans identity, to join the like political struggle. So it is more complicated, but yes, I don't use that word lightly. It's just like, in this particular case, there are these serious allegations about wealthy donors, like 10 muses, getting involved in forced feminization with this particular couple in some pretty dark, sinister ways, and involving, you know, the like pornography industry, and like yeah, you just go look up the receipts for this. I'm not lying. This is like really some pretty serious allegations.
Why would it be me? Why did I groom you?
I don't know. We met.
You were on HRT when we met. I can't believe you did this to me.
And sooner or later, so even though Finster was on HRT, he was a HRT femboy. And I love HRT femboys. There's nothing wrong with a HRT femboy, but what I have problems with is that the trans identity becomes the only way to interpret gender nonconformity in males. You can't just be a gender nonconforming male. It seems like there's this pipeline that pushes gender nonconforming males to take on the like trans identity, either the non-binary or gender fluid or whatever, rather than just saying that I'm just an extremely gender nonconforming male who likes to take hormones or whatever. But it kind of pushes you down this like trans identity pipeline, because trans identity is like trendy, it's like popular, there's pressure. I mean, imagine being in like a live chat for like years with all these people, your entire audience, saying like, you're an egg, you're an egg, you're an egg, you must be trans, you must be trans, I bet you're trans, you're secretly trans. Like, that psychologically is going to create unconscious pressure in your mind. And later, it's probably going to be like a full-blown binary, you know, I am a woman, I've always been a woman type thing.
So, bro, Asher, pull up the clip of me on live stream really recently, of me verbatim saying, if I talk to someone about like transitioning and stuff, like I'm gonna say like, oh, I don't really feel like that or something. Like they'll go like, I know I've always felt like a woman for my like entire life and everything. I always had this like sort of feeling in the back of my head. I ain't got that shit at all. StreamYard.com is shit.
So that point about, you know, the like eventual binary identification, it was only a conjecture based on the very common narrative where a trans woman comes out as non-binary, comes out as gender fluid, and then, you know, they sort of eventually, you know, take on a more binary identification and then sort of rewrite their own personal narrative to say that they've always been a woman. That's a very common narrative in the trans community. They sort of use non-binary as an exploratory stepping stone into a more binary identification as like a trans woman. And I hope Finster doesn't do that. Finster seems to have a more level-headed perspective on his male identity, on like, you know, being male, just being gender non-conforming. And I don't actually think he is extremely trans identified. He seems pretty happy just being like a feminine guy, which is great. I love that. I think Finster, you know, I wish more people would just have that pathway of just being like an HRT femboy and HRT feminized male, and like not use female spaces and like all this stuff. So like, but I think it's the egg culture and the pushing of the trans identification which is the problem.
Sharing your screen and audio. Would you like to hide this message? Yeah, maybe, man. I'm trying to react to your content, make it watchable.
Yes, you already know that you are trans. You already know.
That is indoctrination.
What?
Indoctrinated.
For any possible person who's trans identified, there exists a counterfactual possible world such that you could have run the clock back in time and that person could have managed their gender dysphoria, managed their gender confusion without taking on the trans identity.
That was like, there's a whole lot of nothing in it.
That's just yapping. It's proven.
It's just because you don't understand philosophical concepts like counterfactual or possible world doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm talking about.
That you cannot like therapy away being trans.
It's not about therapying away being trans, because I'm not talking about gender dysphoria. I'm talking about the trans identity itself. There is a possible world, a counterfactual possible world where Finster just took the hormones and remained a gender nonconforming male, but then didn't take on the trans identity because the trans identity is optional. And for example, there are some trans men, trans identified females, for example, Aaron Kimberly, full-blown transsexuals who have been on hormones for been on testosterone for like 10 years or however many long, you know, top surgery, full-blown beard, passes as a man. And he does not identify as trans. He identifies as an extremely gender non-conforming lesbian. So if it's possible for a full-blown transsexual like Aaron Kimberly to conceptualize himself as a gender non-conforming lesbian, as a butch lesbian, then it shows that the trans identity is optional. You can manage your gender dysphoria. You can manage your gender dysphoria going, you know, doing certain transition pathways without taking on the trans identity, because you can always just call yourself an extremely gender non-conforming person. I'm like not saying that you can cure gender dysphoria purely through therapy. What I'm saying is that the trans identity itself is an optional descriptor when, like, it is also possible to describe your being a gender dysphoric person in terms of just being gender nonconforming, because there are these examples of full-blown transsexuals who don't take on the like trans identity, but just conceptualize their gender dysphoria under the context of gender nonconformity and being like a butch lesbian. And similarly, you can conceptualize your gender dysphoria by just saying like I'm like a man, I'm like a femboy or whatever.
Why would I have done that? Because I went with the difficult route of like, maybe I'll transition and now I'm happy.
Well, you're wrong, babe.
because I didn't say that transition never leads to happiness. I'm saying that it's the feminization that makes you happy. It's it's the taking of the hormones. And I'm just saying, like, and the case of detransitioners shows that it's possible to manage your dysphoria without taking on the like trans identity, even if you don't regret your transition, because many detransitioners don't regret their transition and they like some of the effects that they got from their transition pathway. It's just like now they've reconceptualized their identity such that they feel like the trans identity is like optional, and then they've re-identified with their natal birth sex. But so it's like way more complicated. But basically, my point was just that the trans identity itself is like optional when you can manage your gender dysphoria without taking on the whole conceptual ideological apparatus of the like the trans identity or whatever. So okay, so I'm only 5 minutes into this video, and like my video is already up to 36 minutes, and like I'm kind of losing steam a little bit. And but I kind of made my basic points about autogynephilia and the misrepresentation of the theory. And so I kind of made my point. I might react to more of this later. But like I don't think this is like a serious intellectual conversation between people who are familiar with the relevant like literature and sexology, who are familiar with the concept of autogynephilia. And that's my thing, is like these like trans women, they sort of going around thinking that they've debunked the theory of autogynephilia when they're actually just straw manning it, and they don't understand the theory, and they don't understand the relevant research, and they don't understand things from an objective scientific perspective, but yet they're convinced that somehow this theory is like been debunked, or it's pseudoscience or whatever. And they just like don't understand what they are talking about. So okay, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Take care. Bye bye.